place in the finals of the World Championships 2021. The game is about to start, I think. Let's see. My predictions is that burpcow will take this. He's a slight ELO favorite, but I consider him clearly the stronger player. So the game should start any minute now. I think both players are online. I will just sit and relax for a second until the game starts. So, burpcow of Canada and garnek123 from Poland, apparently. So the players are getting ready to start the first game. First to 6 wins. And garnek is white in the first game. Starts with e4. Burpcow has a habit of playing all sorts of openings. So let's see. As you can see, he spends quite a lot of time, if you can call 3-4 seconds per move in the first moves, a lot of time. That means he's not super prepared, but rather is just trying to get a position to play. And apparently garnek isn't very prepared either, because this is pretty much a standard position. Bishop b5 is one of the moves you can play. So now there are a lot of interesting moves here for black. You could put your knight on e4 in the next move, for instance, and put some pressure on the bishop here, on the pawn here. Yeah, knight e4. And garnek spends a lot of time here. I seem to recall him playing d4 in the last match. So maybe he's not used to playing e4, I don't know. White doesn't want to spend a pawn here on b2. That's way too passive. That leaves black with an extra pawn here at on the king's side, where white's king is bound to end up. So, yeah, I think white should just ignore this pawn. Maybe simply castle. Because it takes blacks a lot of time to capture on c3. So maybe castles is the right way. Now that black played a fairly passive move, white thinks it's okay to put the pawn on b2, but I think the pawn on f6 is more useful than the pawn on b2. So more or less black has equalized here, I think. Which is good, considering that the white's opening advantage is much, much bigger in Crazy House than it is in normal chess. So what should black do here? He trades off his knight. He could have waited with that, I think. Maybe unpin the knight on c6. And obviously castling is also an option. I don't know, maybe black is regretting he traded this bishop, maybe a bit prematurely. Because waiting with the trade would have left white guessing a bit more what black's intentions are. So black tries to force the white rook to g1, and now white cannot castle kingside anymore. And this is a nice move, because if white trades here, the h file is open. Once again, black decides to quickly trade off his knight. Maybe it was better to try to open up the position slightly. Because, yeah. Now white has pressure, and he makes it Zwischenzug, taking on g7, and probably if we get a chance he will put the bishop on h6. I was thinking maybe instead of taking there, just playing bishop h6. Not sure why he didn't do that. So this is a very dangerous position, obviously, for black. f6 is under fire. The king is doing some excursion here on h6. Wasn't it better to take on g7 like this, and then if black recaptures, take on e5? So this was probably a mistake, which black immediately capitalizes on, because white wanted to maybe put a bishop on g7, but now bishop at g4 just breaks the connection between these two pieces. So if bishop at g7, black can just take on h5. And this presents white with a huge problem, which is not easy to solve. Pieces hanging now everywhere. There is a mating threat here. And black just tries to snatch all the material he can. And this is threatening mate on queen e2. Very strong move. And since white only has diags, he cannot really check. And now it's mate. In just a few moves, I think. The question is how? Will black find something? He will probably opt for a queen sack, because he has so much material. And now something like knight at b4. Knight here will finish white. Okay. burpcow takes the first game. Looked like there were a couple of mistakes from both sides there. And Garnek plays this piece sack that Oppervesen used in the World Champion Finals. Black has a position that is quite easy to play as compensation for the piece. It's difficult to know what to do with the white knights, because let's say white puts his bishop on his knight on f3, it will get harassed by a black pawn on either g4 or e4, and this pawn here is doing a good job protecting these squares, so a knight on f3 cannot really go forward. That's why white chooses another route for the knight. And the bishop b4 check provoked c3, which weakens the light squares. Black might consider pushing e3 and playing knight c2 check. Maybe white should just block it with knight at e3. Knight at e3 would hit both the bishop and the pawn and block the advance of the e-pawn. But he tries to put pressure on this piece instead. Lots of trades coming. And for some reason white chooses to take on b7 instead. It's rather slow. And he doesn't regain the material, so now it's absolutely balanced. And the queen's threatening to come to b2, which is very annoying for white actually. That would threaten the rook and also threaten to play knight at c2 check. Maybe if white takes here, queen will simply take on b7 and then continue to b2. This looks like problem for white. White should probably just forget about this knight, sacrifice on f6 to get something, and then try to maybe bishop a3, attacking and defending. White did get a pawn here, but on the other hand, the g file is open, which gives black some natural developing moves. Now f3 is an issue. And actually the king could castle queenside at some point. Should you maybe bring the queen back this way? Okay, so black decides to sacrifice a pawn. And this is looking very dangerous now. Bishop e4, knight at c2. White's position is simply just falling apart. Knight c2, the white king has to move. And then you just pick up a rook for nothing. And the attack continues. This is over. So white decides to give a queen, but the compensation is very, very bleak, to say the least. So how do you capitalize on this? For starters, black is threatening mate on e2, also preventing the white king from castling. Now the black queen might consider just taking on c5 to give a check on c2 and open up white's king. Actually, white doesn't have any pieces left in hand, so black just switches to playing some chess here. Pawn at d3. Just play simple, okay. So I suspect white will resign here shortly, yeah. Let me just check on something. Yeah. Because that Garnek won. I'm sorry if I said anything else. But Garnek won that game very convincingly. I was a bit confused there for a while. So it's 1-1. And we see the same variation as in the first game. This time white puts his bishop on d3 rather than b5. And black pins the knight, just as in the last game. And now, with the bishop on d3, there's a nice little maneuver for black. He can take there and put the knight on b2. This is probably just equal, but black gets a nice game. Do we have any viewers? One viewer, welcome, Aten. So maybe black can increase the pressure on the white pawn here by retreating to f6. Yes, that's what it does. And then you can put a pawn on e4 also. This pin is actually nasty. I wonder if queen take d3 was a mistake. He probably should have taken with the pawn instead. So what happens now? The idea is take here, and I'm not sure if he wants to take there or if he wants to take on f6. But this is not playable, because then you take the queen here and it's a mating threat there. So bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes... But this looks to favor black, I think. You can take on d2, and then you're threatening to take on f3, and then you simply pick up the bishop on d8. Am I missing something? This looks really, really, really good for black. So after calculating, burpcow decides to go for the trades. And now I don't see... Okay, I was expecting, I should say, taking on d2. Oh well, the knight is just fine here. Black slightly ahead on material. And black has to do some defending here for a few moves, but very soon this extra pawn he has will land somewhere and start harassing the white pieces. So threatening g7 and also to take here. And black simply blocks and protects e4 at the same time. White trying to push forward, but this is looking... It looks like it costs too much, simply. Pawn here would invite a repetition. Pawn takes, and then another pawn. But I don't think black is interested in any kind of repetition here. First of all, he creates some threats of his own, a very useful move. And I'm thinking maybe black could have played bishop h5 there. Let's just check here. What about this move? No, I'm stupid, because takes and it's still protected. Okay, let's go back. So simply pawn at e2, which forces white to sacrifice his queen. It buys him a little time, and now the rook is trapped on g7 actually. So maybe this was greedy for black. Because if he loses the rook, actually, sorry, we're not. Go back live. Okay, so black finds a nice little mating net here. Let's see what happened there at the end. Sorry for the confusion. So what happened was, at this point, black simply retreated to d3. Queen at e4 is apparently very strong. Now simply pawn at e2 delays everything. But black found a very strong move here. Queen at b2. And what about this? Okay. So he can save himself by playing bishop e4. And what happens then is that black cannot take here because of knight h3 and the classical smothered mate. Okay, so after queen at b2 it's more or less over, I think. And rook to c1 was a mistake. Black simply finishes this in nice style. Check, check, check. Everything under control. Back to the game. And they are dueling in the same opening again. As you can see, Garnek got a nice, very nice game last time. He posed some problems that white couldn't solve. And this time white plays it slightly differently. When you take this route with the knight, you put some pressure here on d5. So what's going on here? Why didn't white take on g2 instead? Okay, so this is slightly different. White replaces his knight here on f4, threatening h3 and hoping to collect the g2 pawn at some later stage. But this looks like a weak square. Maybe, I was thinking pawn at e4 maybe, with the idea to place a knight on f3. Maybe white has to exchange the bishop because it was forked. White's position just looks super loose here. I'm thinking a bishop. Okay. Black's position is super loose also. Although this knight is very strong, it protects c5 in case black decides to go this way with the king. There is no knight check without getting traded. So maybe bishop h6, covering d2 and also threatening f8. So now maybe the idea is to take on f8 and then play a rook at h8. The only piece that black will have to put on g8 is the queen, so white will get it back and deliver mate shortly. This is a real threat. Interesting move. I suppose you have to run with the king. What is there to wait for? Just run for it. No, no, it's mate. Or do you run with the king then? Surely that's not better than running first. White picks up a rook for free. We can trade the queens. I don't understand anything here. Why did he just take here? Okay, so now the rook is actually protected. This threatens some pieces and also covers c8 in case black wants to run with his king. Garnek very low on time now and sort of panicking, I think. White can just pick up the bishop, maybe. Or is that too greedy? Looks like very close to mate if he just takes on d8 and takes on f8. You might still consider taking here, maybe. And bishop h6. Not so easy. And with every piece traded, black's attack, if he ever gets the chance, will be quite unstoppable. For instance, rook here, take on c2 maybe. Looks like black is safe now. Safe is maybe a slight exaggeration, but now just go back with the king. And no more checks. The game is over. Black wins. Okay. I didn't expect that at all. Let's take a look at the critical phase of that game. First of all, we can look from the beginning. Black just gives up this piece. Maybe white shouldn't allow the pinning. The computer already thinks that black is quite okay. Now even slightly better. Yeah, taking rook. Rook takes d2 looks better. The computer agrees. But after a little while here, white got a very nice position. Yeah, allowing white to take on g7 was a mistake. You could even take on f8 now. Okay. But white prepares it with knight at f5, and now I'm really surprised that white missed this, because this move was all about taking on f8 and running with the king just doesn't help. You take on d8, so rook at h8, and then you see black has nothing else to do but put his queen on g8, and it's mate on g7. So let's look at next game and what happened in the opening. Slightly different opening now. It's 2-2, I should say, and black has won all the games some reason white decided to give a pawn in the opening. That was a strange decision. Here black might consider just plugging a pawn on d5 also. And here you might play pawn at f6. Just put those extra pawns to use. Even though at the moment white probably has some compensation, this is a position where black will get better eventually if he just gets the time to get his pieces in order. You should, for instance, be careful by playing knight at d5. I was about to say this. What if you take here and play queen to h5? Isn't this dangerous? Okay, so black plays another thing. A little tactical trick. Black takes back the piece. Rook e8 check. Now you could start giving back material. Look at all those light black pieces. Be careful about the queen check here on d7 though. Yeah, typical queen sacrifice. And black will just continue to hit the queen, just pick up material. All sorts of strong moves here. Maybe just take here. Check on e4. Bishop f5. Everything under control. Super control here. Yeah, check here first and then take e3 and it's game over. I don't understand why he didn't play bishop f5, because bishop f5 covers d7. But since white doesn't have any diags, black can afford playing it like this. Maybe, but after rook e7, maybe knight at e5 is a problem. Burpcow really low on time now. Yeah, that should do it. I don't see anything here. Or what about knight at e5? Takes. Because if the king goes back, you have rook, queen takes e8. Yeah. If black had taken on e5, white would get the pawn he needed to take on e8. But now he didn't get it. Although now white looks like he survived. Can he pick up a pawn and then just take on e8? No. Now you can take on d4, e5, sorry. So, black will just put all his pieces on the board now, I think. and he's up. Black plays this so strangely. Why didn't he just put the bishop on d5 while he had the chance? All pieces are hanging now. Okay, maybe he's a bit under pressure on the clock, but so now king takes, queen at c2, followed by queen trade should settle matters. Yes, pawn on f3, so you can place a knight more safely. And now the king isn't getting anywhere. You put the queen on g2 probably, well, depending on where the king goes. And this blocks the only exit, so the king is trapped here. And now knight g2 mate. Well, that wasn't very convincing, I have to say. So black simply won a pawn in the opening, and after this, black is just better. White does not have compensation for the pawn. Yes, as I said, pawn at d5 would be a nice way to make use of your extra pawn. But this just looks good. But what about this? I was thinking... Okay, so queen h5 isn't so strong after all. Ooh, the computer recommends king g8. I would be scared to play that. Everything fine for black. And now, yeah, the computer super likes queen takes d3. And this is still good, but a very natural move would be checking here. But did white miss something here in the end? I don't think he did. No. Back to the game. And burpcow has lost all his well, his 2 white games, so he switches to d4 instead. Pretty much standard symmetrical position. White would like to take there and then take on d5, but black just keeps protecting from behind. So this looks equal. So white doesn't really have a plan here, but maybe repeating is the plan. He did lose his white games, so maybe just keep on trading and trading and trading and claiming a draw is an excellent plan. Garnek thinking a lot here. I suppose you could castle. Are there any more useful moves? I wonder if white is planning to take on d5, because taking here would allow white to take on f5, and taking with a pawn, taking with a knight gives. But what's this? He just blundered a pawn. Or did he? Take here. Yeah, black could take here. But then knight takes f6, pawn takes. This also looks very good for white. White can start infiltrating here, threatening the queen. The e6 square is, yeah, just knight here, take on d5, and black is so far behind in development now. 4 bishops in hand, doing nothing. So maybe go back and create a square on e6 where you can place that pawn. Because right now this knight is actually kind of obstructing the white attack. But white decides to go forward instead, giving up some material, but keeping the initiative. Probably a very good move, because if black takes here, pawn at e6. Black does a classical bishop fork, but pawn at e6 still comes. And now if black moves this queen, another pawn will land on f7, and then knight at d7 or knight at d7. So this wins white the queen. And maybe we're looking at the first win for white in this match. I don't see any counterplay for black at all. Yeah, he simply gives up his queen for a pawn, but another pawn will land here on e6. And that will cost him another piece. So white plays for the initiative all the time here, just going forward. Very nice attack. The knight will go back and check, and then either the queen or the pawn will land here. This is a typical mating pattern. The queen blocking the way for the black king and also protecting the knight on f5. 4-2 to burpcow, who is happy to repeat the opening. Maybe somehow black got a chance to check out what his mistakes were. We saw knight takes d2 in an earlier game. Maybe it's better to be flexible and play bishop d7. Oh, he repeats the same move. This is the bishop I really like. It protects f7. It controls a lot of white squares. And if white somehow capture this, you open up the h file. I wonder if there's a problem for black now. If it goes here, can white maybe pick up a pawn for b7? Ooh, black just gives his queen. For maybe not so much compensation. Although this knight is a bit lost. So, sure, black has some compensation, probably not full compensation. But his light pieces are bound to be much more effective than this knight on a5. You could maybe simply take on b2. This is a strong move also. The bishop's pointing at c2. And if white moves his rook here, maybe then is the time to take on b2. Interesting idea. If you take here, white will have a bishop to put on d6. And black finds a nice defense. But I'm sure white miscalculated this. You can just take twice. White only has one dag and he needs more than that. So now you can hide your king. And things are actually starting to look promising for black, I think. The bishops provide very good control of the board. You can put another bishop on h6 maybe, covering g7 and... Ooh, this is threatening the rook and also threatening to play knight h6. I'm sure black must have missed this. Taking back on b8 was probably a mistake. Yeah, super mistake. Taking on g2 looked much stronger. So black needs to block the g file, and white simply picks up a rook for free. And this game is going back and forth. Now it's starting to look very promising for white instead, I think. But look out for pawn at d2. White doesn't have the time to put his rooks on the last rank. Hello, train flipper. So a very tricky position, even though black blundered a whole rook here on b8. Look at those bishops. Pawn at d2 coming. So maybe just knight h4 or knight f4. This move blocks the view of the bishop though. On the other hand, it keeps away the white queen from entering the defense. And the rooks are really bad at defending. So what do you do now? Pawn somewhere here. Or do you just take on a g2? Okay. So maybe knight here. Black is all over the place with this attack. So you could take on e3 and then knight c4 maybe. And white needs a couple of moves to get anywhere with his attack. This was creative, but what if black takes here? Black might consider taking on d2 and then just protecting the bishop with the knight. So he finds this move, protecting e7 instead. But now he hangs his knight on c4. Simply queen takes h1 maybe. Trying to get rid of this and taking on e8. I'm not sure about anything in this game. What is happening here? Both players low on time. They seem really nervous. Not so clear what those pawn sacrifices on e2 accomplish. You can pick up that rook. And now knight e7 is the real threat. Followed by rook g8. So black has to find something here. But what about king b1? White looks safe here. Pawn e7 decides everything. Black is busted. 3-3. Yeah, how did black lose this? Let's take a quick look. Because black was winning so easily, I think. Yeah, and look here, black is better, even though it's a queen down. So very good feeling for the position there, black giving the queen. Maybe this wasn't the best move. Simply casting was recommended, but this is the first mistake, I think. Taking on g2 looks just crushing. But black decided to spend a tempo on taking this, and this gives white a slight chance to come back in the game. He put his queen on g3, making a double threat of the smothered mate, starting with knight h6, and also threatening b8. But even after black loses his rook, he is so much better. Yeah, taking on g2 again, looking good. But where was the decisive mistake? He placed a lot of pawns on the second rank. Not always clear what they were doing there. So this was apparently the decisive mistake. Black needs to think about his defense. Yeah, he blundered the knight on c4, and after that I think white was better. Let's get back. We see a very interesting position. How did we get there? Oh, an e4, e5. Very sharp opening here with the piece sacrifice. Sacrifices back and forth, and now we are at the current position. What if black just takes here? Is that dangerous? Because the bishop is covering f7. Look at these bishops covering all the squares here. So if a knight lands here, I think black can just retreat into the corner. So knight f6 would protect h5. What happens if white takes here now? Does black have anything convincing? Do you really want to give up your bishop? You had some question there. C6. No. I think the position is just too sharp for them. If you look at a game like this with the computer afterwards, you might think these are two patzers playing, but I can assure you they are not. White has a huge threat here. Queen e8 followed by a diagonal f7. And I don't know why he gave up that bishop on h5 voluntarily. Also simply d5 is hanging, and obviously the bishop on h4 is hanging. A lot of threats going on here. And I don't see an attack for black. And I suspect that Garnek doesn't find one either, because he's thinking and thinking and thinking. The position just looks resignable. White has to look out so he doesn't take with the queen and allows the knight fork on g2. Maybe a pawn here. If king f8, you have knight g6. And Garnek just lost on time. Strange game. Yeah, I was wondering, should I have a delay on my stream? I probably should, I suppose. So this time black doesn't play a knight c6, so there's a slight difference here. We saw this a couple of times, but now we get something different. This is a strong move, because if the knight goes and the rook goes here, h7 is hanging. It all depends on what happens if black takes here now. Is this good or bad? Usually these positions are good for white. Black has won a pawn. No, it's actually equal, but it takes time to get that pawn. This is a very typical move, creating threats towards the black queen, and a queen trade would favor white heavily, because he has this pawn and he can set up threats, putting his queen somewhere here on the 8th rank. Yeah, I will think about that next time. Thanks, Train Flipper. Oh, I don't expect so either. So now there is no queen trade anymore, but knight takes d1, then black doesn't have any threats, and now white has set up a lot of threats, threatening f6, threatening h7. This is looking very promising for white. So what if you just take on h7? Isn't that good? White lost his queen, but he's getting material back quickly here. Also, his king looks rather safe. Yeah, Train Flipper suggests taking here, take here, and then maybe put the queen on a5 and take on h5. Interesting suggestion. Although I suspect the rook landing on f8 will create problems for black. We can look at it afterwards. This is just crushing. Black has white has everything here. It just has to protect e2. Maybe put a pawn here. Seems simple enough. But then knight takes here and bishop takes. So what do? Do you place the rook on d2? Rook on... Black doesn't have any pawns to place. But this is mate in one. No, it's not mate in one. Sorry. Bishop covers. Could have been mate in one. Now we got the pawn for e2 though. But white can just sacrifice his rook. And now he has time to pick up this. And now there are too many threats. Maybe queen at f6 is the simplest solution, because you have a discovered check, and then knight at e7 mate. some really nasty threats here. And also, this doesn't help because you have knight d5 with mate in just a few moves. So, is it 5-5 now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's 5-4. 5-4 burpcow, who still has a match point. And we see another d4. Seems like burpcow is improvising every move here. For some reason, black played this rather passively with the bishop behind his pawn chain. Yeah, you're right, train flipper. I'm just a little bit confused here. It's too early for me. So this should favor white slightly. Black is a bit cramped, whereas white still has some useful moves he can make. Simply cancelling. And maybe white should send his knight on a mission over to the king's side. He prefers to just open the position, making use of his better development. And this looks like a nice little advantage for white, who quickly makes use of the awkward positioning of the bishop here. T6 is hanging. And now this is clearly favorable for white. So a safe option would be the bishop on g3, but you can always place it on d6 a bit more aggressively. At some point I would like to trade off that knight on g4 and also let the queen out of his her cage. Yeah, because if he takes, f6 is starting to look really weak. And what else is there to do but to trade? The knight is hanging. What is this? pawn will land here somewhere. I'm not sure about this pawn move, because sometimes the rook can pick this up, and then if white has attacked g7, the rook can take on g7, yeah, like this. Rook takes here, maybe bishop here somewhere, and then the queen can take the bishop, opening up the g file. But if the rook takes, white will not take on g7. He will place maybe a knight on e5. So this picks up the queen. Threatening d7. Threatening to weaken black's king's position even more. Black tries to find some counterplay. But taking on d7 and placing that new one bishop on e5 looks promising. Taking here, bishop at e5 would provoke something on g7, and then maybe queen sacrifice on g8. Okay. Black could have taken the queen. A little desperate attack by black here, but now it's all over. No way to defend. h7 when that time comes. Because if rook takes here, you have knight at g6 mate, which white missed, but it didn't really matter. Okay, congratulations to burpcow. I don't know if it was early in the morning, if it was me that was confused or the players, but I just got the feeling that both players were a bit nervous. Yes, white got a healthy advantage, open up the center here very instructively, and made use of the passive black setup by placing the pawn on b6, very strong move. And from now on, white was just cruising. I wasn't sure, why didn't it take on g4? It could have. But obviously this is still very good for white. Winning the queen, even queen at g8 is strong here. So what happens if black takes here? Well, the idea is knight at g6. Let's have a look. Because you cannot take, then it's queen at h7 mate, so you need to go here, and then ta-da, with a devastating attack. Cute. And now it's just over. Black has a few checks, but nothing to worry about really. White just waits until black's forces are depleted. White missed the mate in one here, but this is mate in a couple of moves. Okay. Thank you for watching, even though I suspect it's very early or very late for some of you, but you're welcome to watch the video on my Twitch channel whenever you like. So thank you for your valuable comments and suggestions, also Train Flipper. And see you around. Bye bye.